BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, this is the Farming Today podcast with me, Kaz Graham. Thank you for joining us. In this episode, mute swans and barnacle geese were badly affected by avian flu. But how are their populations recovering? And after wild camping on Dartmoor gets the legal thumbs up from the Supreme Court, we hear how illegal fly camping is a blot on some national park landscapes.
It might be big tents, it might be fairy lights, it might be barbecues, often litter left, tents left. You trash the environment. That's not about getting close to nature. That's alienating you from nature.
With more on that a little later. First, though, plastic pollution is contaminating insects at the base of food chains, raising fresh concerns about the long-term impacts on wildlife, according to a new study by the University of Sussex. Researchers have discovered fragments of plastic in a wide range of invertebrates, which are prey for small mammals like hedgehogs. Polyester fibres, commonly shed from clothing, were the most frequently detected types of plastic. BBC South East Environment correspondent Yvette Austin reports.
In an outdoor space at the University of Sussex, students are on the hunt for bugs. They wave nets among the long grass and tap trees to knock down the insects. Surveys like this have been going on across the county as part of research into plastic pollution, and the results are disturbing. Emily Thrift led the study.
We surveyed 51 different sites, and from those they were from different land cover types. So this, for example, is an improved grassland, and then we were in suburban areas, arable and horticulture, as well as calcareous grasslands as well.
It's chalky.
Chalky, yeah.
In the lab, each specimen was identified and then analysed. Emily shows me a series of photos taken through a microscope of fibres that were contained within the insects' tiny bodies, and another with yellow, red and orange flecks of paint.
We found this in a common black garden beetle, which is nylon, and it was 4.5 millimetres long. So it is really long for the size of the beetle itself, which is fairly small.
Out of the 581 samples, 12% contained plastics. In slugs and snails, the figure was around a quarter, and in earthworms, a third. The research was prompted by the results of previous studies which revealed plastic in the faeces of small mammals such as hedgehogs, which feed on insects. Emily Thrift again.
I think it's really important from an insect point of view because they're being eaten by animals higher up the food chain.
So where is all this plastic coming from? Much of what is found is in the form of fibres from clothing. So the theory is that when dried human sewage sludge is used to fertilise some farmers' fields, it contains the fibres coming out of our washing machines. Professor Fiona Matthews is an environmental biologist.
I think the thing that's really surprising is just how many animals are now contaminated with plastics. You know, if you think that you're getting between a third and a quarter of things like earthworms and beetles having plastics in them, basically what we're saying is it's everywhere. And it means it's not only in things like hedgehogs, it's in blackbirds, you know, and heaven knows it's probably in us as well. So, you know, we're in a situation now where we really, really have to work to stop any more plastic getting into our environment.
That report from Yvette Austin. Now, despite some recent rain and a forecast for more, there are still concerns about a lack of water affecting farms, reservoirs and rivers. In Scotland, SEPA, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, has warned that rain now is unlikely to be enough to replenish river levels. The Environment Agency in England and Wales say that it's been the driest start to the year since 1956 and the sunniest for more than 100 years, which is all well and good unless you're waiting for the grass to grow to feed your livestock. Some farmers have been totting up the cost in pounds and pence of this spring's dry spell, including the chair of the National Federation of Dairy Farmers, who's based in North East Cumbria.
My name's Robert Craig. I'm stood up here now on one of our fields at Kenhead Farm near Ainstable, surrounded by about 400 black and white Frisian cows, all in peak production time of year, just munching their heads off, eating loads of grass and producing loads of milk. We run 3 dairy businesses and we're looking in the region of about £100,000 already, so about £30,000 per business. But you know, once you go into a period where you've got no feed on the farm of your own and you have to start buying it in on a lorry, then it becomes a very acute problem pretty rapidly. And we don't have any choice. We've got a productive herd of cows that need feeding.
That's dairy farmer Robert Craig on the commercial cost of the dry spell. And it's not just the grass that feeds farm livestock that needs a good soaking of rain in spring. Food for wildlife has been affected too. It has been slim pickings for the birds that live in what are usually called wetlands. Dr Teresa Frost is head of water bird monitoring for the British Trust for Ornithology. She's been looking into the recovery of wild bird populations from avian flu. But I asked her first how they've been getting on in this dry spell.
So wetlands are really important to our bird populations. We have a lot of birds that absolutely depend on water. They use it to nest next to, they use it for food, they might need damp soil to feed in, and so it is a concern to have increasing droughts. As the soil dries up, it's reducing opportunities for nesting and feeding for many species.
And of course, it's not just dry spells or wet spells in the UK that affect our birds, is it? I mean, it's what happens in the places that they migrate from too.
Yeah, exactly. So here in the UK, we are internationally important for our waterbird populations, particularly in the winter and during passage periods. So these are birds that breed in the high Arctic or further north and east of us, or in Iceland. And then they come here and travel through. They depend on our wetlands here, but obviously they have to have good breeding conditions in the north as well. And we're seeing, increasing change in the conditions in their breeding areas, and that is having an impact on numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we're likely to see more dry or wet spells with the climate changing. I mean, some will be bad for birds, but you might get particularly good weather for a breeding season.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're seeing some species actually spreading north or recovering their numbers, particularly with some of the egrets, for example. You might be seeing more, possibly partly due to the climate now suiting them more here than it did in the past.
Now, you're one of the authors of a report just out on the impact of avian flu on wild birds between 2021 and 2023, looking mainly at seabirds and what are called water birds. That's things like swans. What was the point of that research? What were you aiming to find?
Obviously, it's been in the news a lot. It's had huge impacts on farmers, but it's affecting wild birds as well. And one of the things that was very hard at the start was that we could test a small number of birds. The government could test a small number of birds to see whether they had the disease. But that doesn't really tell you what the impact is on those wild bird populations. So we already had our long-running monitoring schemes, like the Wetland Bird Survey, which might tell us whether the population's going up or down. But we also started asking volunteers and reserve wardens to tell us about how many dead birds they were seeing. And then we did a collation of that to try and see which species might be the most impacted. And there were a couple that really stood out on the waterbird side. One was barnacle goose, where we have large populations in particular places. So, for example, all of the barnacle geese that breed in Svalbard winter on the Solway estuary, and they were really hard hit. And they're on one estuary, and you could really see the impact straight away. But for something like mute swan, that's a really familiar bird. And we were getting a lot of reports of dead mute swans, but it's much more difficult to know whether that has had an impact nationwide. So that's what this research was about.
And do you know what those populations are doing now? Have they been recovering?
In the case of the barnacle goose, we have seen really encouraging recovery in the numbers. With mute swan, we're a bit behind in working out what's happening. So we're now starting to see a dip in the national numbers, which we think might be caused by the bird flu impact. But what we're hoping to see is that this dip will be short-lived and that they will bounce back, much like barnacle goose have done. But only by continuing to monitor will we be able to know that.
Dr Teresa Frost from the BTO. It's half term this week for many schools, which is a good excuse for families to get out into the countryside and enjoy some of the best scenery that the UK has to offer. Much of it is protected by national parks, but the people who run them have their work cut out. There are 15 parks in the UK, and all this week we're going to be looking into national parks. I've been talking to Kevin Bishop from Dartmoor National Park and National Parks England about those challenges, but I started by asking for his response to the Supreme Court's decision last week. After a long legal battle with landowners Alexander and Diana Darwell, judges ruled that wild camping on Dartmoor is legal.
We're relieved and we're delighted. We hope that the ruling draws a line and we can move forward. It provides real clarity that people have a right to backpack camp as long as they follow the bylaws and the camping code.
And how significant is it on a wider scale, do you think?
Well, for Dartmoor, it's really significant. And also, I think there are lessons for other areas because the Supreme Court looked at this phrase, open air recreation. The legal team representing Mr. and Mrs. Darwell was suggesting that had a very constrained interpretation. And so on Dartmoor, it would mean that if you walked onto a common, you couldn't stop for a picnic, was one of the examples they gave. You just had to keep on walking. Open air recreation is behind the concept of our national parks, so it has a wider ramification, a positive one because of the judgment.
Dartmoor is actually the only national park where people can legally wild camp. But some campaigners say that this should now open up the debate about the right to camp in other parks, which kind of sounds great in theory. But what would the difficulties be if that were to be permitted?
Well, I think there are some lessons to learn from Dartmoor in terms of the way in which we approach it. So on Dartmoor, we've worked with landowners and access groups to identify a camping map. That's historic, but we've revised it to represent the different interests. So that's almost like a partnership approach. We then have the bylaws which codify what camping means. Those are things that could be applied to other national parks if the government was so minded through the Access Green Paper, and you could have a localised approach.
What they call fly camping is a real problem in some national parks. I mean, in the Lake District National Park, for example, they've even employed security officers to deal with antisocial behaviour.
We need to draw a really clear distinction between what we call backpack camping. So that's carrying everything that you need in your backpack. An overnight expedition, you carry everything in, you leave no trace, you take everything out. That is good. A big tick. And then fly camping is a big cross. Fly camping to us is where you come. It might be big tents, it might be fairy lights, it might be barbecues, often litter left, tents left. You trash the environment. That's not about getting close to nature. That's alienating you from nature. So backpack camping, good. Fly camping, we will use all of our powers to stop it.
And if parks are paying for security officers to look out for people who are doing fly camping, I mean, that does not come cheap. And national parks are funded by the government. Can you tell us what national parks gets from the government now compares with, say, 10 years ago?
So if you looked at our budgets in real terms compared to 10 years ago, for every pound that we got 10 years ago, we now get 50 pence. That's the level of cut. But we also need to bear in mind that not all of our money comes from government. Government has told us diversify your income streams. We've done that. So for every pound or 50 pence that we get from the government, we in essence double it. And I suppose looking forward, to me, our national parks are our finest landscapes, and we should be cherishing and looking after these places and making sure they're available for all to enjoy.
But if you're having to spend time, energy, effort on raising money, surely your staff are doing that, being a commercial venture, rather than doing the job that one would hope you were employed to do?
I think that's a really good question. There's a dilemma, isn't there, between delivering public services and being told that you need to act more commercially. And we've got no change to the rules and regulations governing us. They limit what we can do commercially. But we have diversified our income streams already. I suppose there needs to be a bit of a debate about how we fund our national parks going forward if we're going to continually be cut by government.
That's Kevin Bishop from Dartmoor National Park. And that's all we've time for today. I'm Kaz Graham. The producer is Rebecca Rooney. And Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.